Joining me now is Trevor Loudon. I want to talk about the war on boomers. The war on boomers. We're being told that it's the boomers that have stolen the future of various generations that have come behind them. And yet, many of us know that the boomers didn't have it easy. Some of them had to go off to Vietnam. They didn't come back, or they came back missing limbs. Some came back, but they didn't know what their fate would be when they left. Some of the boomers, they bought homes with 16, 17, 18% mortgage interest. No generation in America's had it easy. And of course, many of the boomers have seen their retirement eaten away with inflation. But why is it that the powers that be, the power elite, the intelligentsia, the socialists, the globalists, whatever you want to call them, why is it that they want to have the younger generation resent the older generation? There is a historical framework by which this has been done again and again. You must find some group of people to blame the problems on. Politicians can't accept responsibility. We can't say, oh, it was the Federal Reserve, 1913, and its creation, which was a total scam, that we were told it was being started to control inflation and stop bank failures. We've had more bank failures and inflation, well, since the Federal Reserve was created than we ever had before. And we can go on and blame so many things on too much government, the abuse of government. But they can't have you blaming the government. They want the government to be the savior. So they need to find someone to blame. Let's blame it on the boomers. Hitler blamed it on the Jews. Stalin blamed it on the farmers. There always has to be a group that is marginalized and characterized and terrorized and is told is the source of all suffering and oppression. In many ways, Christians are experiencing that today. The Jews are experiencing that today. This is an historical strategy that very few people are understanding when it comes to what is now a very large battle on social media that seeks to blame the problems not just on the Jews, but on the boomers. Joining me now is Trevor Loudon. Trevor, welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Always great to be here. You know, they're blaming it on us, Brandon.
Well, we're not old
enough. We're not old enough yet.
I'm not a boomer.
Really.
I was born in '69. What does that make me, Logan? Going to look it up. I don't even know what my I think am I the X generation? I don't even know. I don't know. Look it up, Logan. What's 1969? What am I? I'm Gen X. I am. What year were you born, Trevor?
58.
58. What is he, Logan? You're a boomer, boy. You're a boomer.
I'm a boomer. It's all my fault.
It's all your fault, Trevor.
I grew up in affluence.
We finally found the source of all suffering and oppression. We found it. The source of all suffering and oppression. Trevor Loudon. We've solved the world's problems, folks. Good night, America.
It's all done. Done and dusted.
Go ahead, Trevor. What is this really all about?
Well, this is, this is the globalists, the communists, the enemies of America, seeking yet another means to divide us. They've used race, they've used class, they've used gender, they've used every single thing they can. And this is the latest iteration. You know, in a normal society, the generations are bound together. You know, you respect your parents, you respect your grandparents, the grandparents educate the children. It's a very key part of keeping a society together, those intergenerational bonds. So if you can get a lot of young, poor guys who don't see a lot of future for themselves to have yet another source for their problems other than themselves, it's going to find fertile ground. And, you know, sometimes it's the Jews, sometimes it's whatever, but now it's the boomers as well. So, you know, it's just going to make those Thanksgiving get-togethers even more fraught than they have been already.
Well, it's really reminiscent, is it not? Stalin. Didn't he blame the problems on the farmers and deal with them accordingly? Isn't it the same thing as Karl Marx and the the bourgeoisie, the property owners versus the proletariat, the workers. I mean, you can just go through every dictator and find where they do pick one or two groups and declare they are the source of the suffering, the source of the problem, right?
Yeah, right now the Russians have decided to promote Jew hatred. Biden and Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton was Christian nationalists, meaning ordinary patriotic Christians. Okay, Christian conservatives. So yes, this is another way of driving a wedge. And Stalin wanted to communize the Soviet Union. He said there was a large a population of, particularly in Ukraine, of what they called Kulaks, the rich peasant, meaning a peasant who had a little bit of land, maybe a couple of horses, maybe a little stall at the market, and could educate his children. That was regarded as a rich peasant, a Kulak. And they were regarded as the main opponents of the collectivization of agriculture. They weren't going to give up their 2 acres. They were not going to give up their little plot of land. So Stalin forcibly confiscated all the grain from Ukraine and all the food, and just denuded the place of any nutrition at gunpoint. And between 6 and 10 million people died of starvation, to the point they were eating their own kids. You know, so this is the demonization of populations has been around for a long time, and the Marxists have really made a tool of it on a very scientific basis.
There's a YouTube channel out there called Dictators Files. I haven't watched any of their videos other than a little bit of this one. And it's called The War on the Farmers. You guys might want to find it on YouTube. Listen to what he says. Tell me if you agree with this analysis and history, Trevor.
Purges. There was a field, and on that field stood a farmer. He wasn't rich. He wasn't an enemy. He was simply free. But to Joseph Stalin, freedom in the hands of a peasant was more dangerous than any army. In the early 1930s, he declared war, not on nations, not on leaders, but on his own people. It was called dekulakization, a word that sounded bureaucratic, until you saw what it meant. Families torn from their homes, villages erased, entire communities branded as traitors. And it all began with one man's obsession: to break the spirit of the land. When the Russian Revolution ended, the countryside tried to breathe again. Peasants took back land, tools, and hope. They called themselves Kulaks, a word that once simply meant fist. Strong-handed farmers, those who owned a little more than others, a horse, a plow, maybe a hired worker. For years, they were the backbone of the Soviet food supply. They grew the grain that fed the cities. Even Lenin had warned against attacking them too harshly. But Stalin saw something else. To him, the kulaks weren't partners. They were a threat. They represented independence. And in Stalin's Soviet Union, no one was allowed to be independent. In 1929, Stalin signed a new decree, the liquidation of the kulaks as a class. No trial, no definition, just a signature, and a death sentence for millions. As historian Robert Conquest wrote in The Harvest of Sorrow, Stalin's war against the kulaks was the first great terror, the model for every purge that followed. Within months, tens of thousands of families were labeled enemies. Their property was seized, their animals slaughtered, their homes burned. Some were executed on the spot. Others were packed into boxcars, bound for the frozen camps of Siberia, all for owning too much grain, all for refusing to surrender their land. When Stalin declared war on the kulaks, the battlefield wasn't a front line. It was every village in the Soviet Union. The orders came quietly. through party committees, local councils, factory meetings. Each town received a list, names, families, people to be dealt with. Stalin's new enemies were not soldiers or saboteurs. They were farmers, neighbors, the man across the fence. According to historian Sheila Fitzpatrick, the campaign turned society against itself. Villagers who once shared tools and bread were now forced to denounce each other for survival.
Wow. What do you make of that? You agree? You got it right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it was a Stalin was a doctrinaire communist. Lenin was a bit more tactical. Stalin was just a fist. Stalin was a hammer, and he found a nail, and he destroyed the Kulaks, regardless of what it was going to do to the rest of the country. Destroying his main productive source. But they did a Kulakization. Putin right now is justifying his attacks in Ukraine as a denazification. It's the same tactic. He's making up these imaginary Nazis in Ukraine who must be destroyed by taking over the whole country. That's what Stalin did 70 years ago. So you sort of understand why the Ukrainians are not very keen to give up their sovereignty to Putin.
So how do you see things going forward? I'm concerned about the rise of active euthanasia. I'm concerned about the dehumanization, the targeting of older people in our society. Do you find the timing of this rather suspicious at a time when active euthanasia is rising, when healthcare costs are rising, when there's the goal of depopulation, giving people shots that are killing people left and right, as we talk about a lot? There seems to be the overall desire to get rid of different people groups, but certainly now to target older people, and particularly at a time when Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security is supposedly a strain on the budgets. And now this is being put out into the cultural stream, that the problem is the boomers have been running the country for 40 years now, and they have all this wealth, and it's time for them to go. Of course, part of my problem before you answer that question, Trevor, is that someone that bought a house that was worth $50,000 or $100,000 that is now worth $500,000, $600,000, these young people, they don't understand that those people had nothing to do with the value of that house going up like that. That wasn't the value of the house going up. It was the dollar going down. They had nothing to do with that. And when the dollar went down, that meant their purchasing power was going down. So while their house may be worth quite a bit more, they were losing in the hidden tax of inflation. And now when they would go to buy an SUV, you could go buy an SUV for $100,000, a brand new SUV. So it wasn't like they got a free ride. Everything has gone up on them as well. Their health insurance, before they got on Medicaid or Medicare, their purchases of automobiles, all the things that they need, groceries. So it's not like they got a free ride. And if they do sell that house, they then have to pay capital gains, most of them. And again, they've also paid an awful lot in taxes. I just don't think the young people understand that this value of their home is very subjective to it being sold. So many of them will never realize the value of that home because they're going to die with hospice care in the house. There's just not an equal understanding here by these young people as to the reality.
Well, look, and many of those grandparents are raising their grandchildren. They're paying the bills of their grandchildren. So look, this is like Zeke Emanuel, the brother of Rahm Emanuel. Zeke Emanuel is a famous bioethicist, which bioethics is a fancy way of justifying euthanasia and abortion, right? He said everybody should be basically prepared to die at 75, because after 75, you're consuming more resources than you're contributing. you're no longer a net gain to society. And this is my big argument against socialized healthcare. People forget this. You know, in a free market healthcare system, you are a customer, and the system makes money by keeping you alive and happy and healthy and productive for as long as they can. They have that incentive. In a socialized healthcare system, that is a system with limited resources, but unlimited demands. It is medical decisions are no longer made by doctors, they are made by accountants. And so, you know, like an oncology department might have a budget of, say, $20 million a year, but they've used it all up by November. They're running out of money. So they have a 7-year-old girl with leukemia in one bed and a 75-year-old guy with prostate cancer in another, and they don't have enough to fund both of them. So who's going to lose out, do you think? You know, socialized healthcare is great as long as you don't get old.
Here's one website. This was a year ago. Boomers hit the timing lottery. They bought $1 million homes for 6 raspberries. A little facetious here, obviously. They went to college for a few $100s a semester. They could buy a reliable used car for a few $100s. All the while, they flooded our country with cheap labor, driving up the cost of housing and schooling. And they supported proposals like cash for clunkers, which ensured their grandkids would be paying $10,000 for a used car going forward. Now, as the youth of America recognize that they no longer have access to the American dream and want to drastically change their trajectory of the country and return to our glorious path, boomers are last line of defense for the very people who destroyed our country. They want one last dopamine rush, even if it means obliterating any hope or future for their grandkids, end quote. That's garbage, because most of these people had nothing to do with these policies.
Garbage. Look, the reason we have these bad policies is because we've had socialists inside our government for so long, instituting policies like socialized healthcare, all of these government policies that basically robbed Social Security, robbed all these retirement programs, made it very difficult for people to save for their own retirement. The boomers just did as best they could, as well as they could. You know, the people who are here today would have done no better had they been in the same position. This is not a moral thing here. This is just people coping with what they could and the socialist policies inflicted upon them by these horrific governments. And so, but this is my point. The pressure is on now. We can't pay, you know, Social Security is going broke. There will be no pensions in the government pensions in the future. So how do you avoid a crisis? You've got to raise retirement age, and you've got to cut pensions, and more people have to die. More people have to die earlier, so you never have to pay out on them. So of course, like, we all know that abortion was instituted for social ends. You know, Margaret Sanger wanted to use abortion to purify the white race, to make sure there weren't too many brown and black babies born. Well, now they're using euthanasia to ensure that there are not too many useless eaters out there, and so that their socialist policies can go on a bit longer before they go completely bankrupt. If you give the government control of your healthcare and your economy, it's only a matter of time before they start to dictate how long you live. That's the accountants making the decision. In a socialist system, you are not an asset to society. Your wisdom isn't valued. You are basically a liability. You're regarded as a liability, and any businessman will tell you you minimize or eliminate your liabilities. So that's where we're heading.
There was my wife and I had some of our friends over for dinner over the weekend. The two couples, they're old enough to be my parents. I talk about them often, and I'm telling their age to give a perspective here. One of them told the story. They're in their early 80s. One of them told the story of how they they got a place and they were paying $95 a month for a place. And they thought, the one spouse thought they were going to end up in the poorhouse. How could we afford $95 a month in rent, right? How could we afford this? We're going to end up in the poorhouse. The point I'm trying to make to these folks today, that young people that think that the boomers, you know, they got so much for so cheap. You have to remember what it was their income was. Here is the United States Census Bureau, okay? The United States Census Bureau. In 1965, the median income of all families, so the middle, you know, just the average income in 1965 was about $6,900, okay? So when you talk about what people paid for a car, I mean, if you were paying $1,500 for a new car, well, again, compare that to what percentage of your income was that. If you're paying $100 a month in rent and your groceries, add it all together real quick and figure out what percentage of your income. So these young people are looking at these cheap prices, but they're not realizing, well, their salaries were way down. Their salaries were low because, again, the purchasing power of the dollar was strong.
Yeah. Look, my first job, I got paid $1.47 an hour. And I thought I was rich when I went to a new job at $2 an hour. You know, I thought I'd made it. Look, it's not the monetary, because the currency has been constantly devalued. It's how long you have to work, how much time you have to put in to afford a certain range of products. Like, how long do you have to work to earn a Big Mac? How long do you have to work to buy a 3-bedroom house, etc.? And by the way, 3-bedroom houses are a lot more luxurious than the 3-bedroom houses of the 1940s, who didn't have air conditioning, didn't have all the mod cons that they have today. Look, no generation, despite all the bad stuff that's going on, despite all the corruption and the debt and all of the chaos that's going on in the economy, all government driven, this generation is still better off than any previous generation.
The average cost of a car in 1965, the average car in 1965 was around $2,500 to $3,000. Okay, so if your average salary is $6,900 and you're having to pay $2,500 to $3,000 for a new car, so you're giving about half of your annual salary to a car, and you still haven't paid taxes and your rent or mortgage and your other expenses. So, you know, again, people need to go and do the math on this when they're like, oh, you guys had it so easy. Your house payment was, you know, X dollars a year, you know, so cheap. Well, go look what their income was, right? So they're not comparing apples and apples at all.
Yeah. The whole point is to obscure these comparisons, to stoke division, to stoke a sense of resentment against the older members of our society, who should be valued for what they can pass on, rather than reviled for what they've used. You know, but that's the whole thing. You can use any statistic to prove a point, just about, if you know how to manipulate it. The whole point of this argument, Brandon, is certain forces are stoking deliberate division between the generations in America to further bring down the country for everybody. United we stand, divided we fall. So that's the real issue here. All the rest of it is just smoke and mirrors.
And isn't this part of Mao's little red book, the Four Olds? Get rid of the old culture, the old religions. So this is a Maoist ideology as well. Get rid of the old people. They're the problem. They're the one holding us back. But reality is, it's the older people, that many of them, who tell us what America was like when they were growing up, that this isn't normal. This is not how society is supposed to go. This is not according to our Constitution and our history. You know, some of these people, they fought communism in Vietnam. Many of them are passing quickly, but they were fighting communism in the wars like the Korean War. Of course, now many of the World War I, World War II, they're gone. Very few World War II even left. They're going quickly. But what we would have left today, folks fighting communism, would be those that went to Vietnam or the Korean War. But even if they didn't go to war, they were raised at a time when they're able to tell us their life lessons and that this is not normal. This is not the way society is supposed to be run. This is not following the rule of law, right? This is not considered acceptable behavior and conduct from our government officials. They need to wipe out the old to bring in the new. They need to erase the history, not just the statues and the monuments and the museums. They need to erase the truth tellers. They need to erase the living historians, the older people who were there.
The link to America as it should be. If they can cut that link, if they can destroy your history, they can control the past. And I'll say this furthermore, most of this stuff has been fomented on the right by what we call the woke right, the left-wing right, which is invariably pro-Russia, invariably anti-American, and invariably anti-constitutional. The so-called woke right is actually left, posing as right. So this is their way of bringing America down into a revolutionary situation, and it's just one more part of the death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not, when you find out who's pushing the stuff, it's not hard to figure out why they're doing it.
Indeed.
It
Trevor
really
Loudon,
isn't.
TrevorLoudon.com, TrevorLoudon.com to get his great books and articles and everything else. It's at TrevorLoudon.com. And Trevor, as always, thank you for your time, your analysis, your history. This one, my parents are boomers, and you're a boomer. But I'm telling you, this war on boomers, if the young people think this doesn't come with a price, if they're being selfish and thinking it doesn't come with a price, they don't understand. Because when the boomers are targeted, or this is used to deprive them of their property and civil rights and humanization, the younger people that are maybe going along with it and feeding the narrative, they're going to find they're going to be served up as part of the problem when the time is right as well.
Yeah, exactly. And their wealth will be destroyed along with that of the boomers. You know, look, the older people in society are the reservoir of wisdom, of history. There's a reason why most societies venerate their elderly, because you cannot have a functioning society without the older people who remember the history and it can pass it on. That link to the past is super important, and they're trying to break that link, just as they did with Pol Pot, just as they did with Mao Zedong. Destroy the olds, break the links to the old society so you can create something new. This is a Marxist playbook, but now it's being pumped through the right. It's very concerning.
And through social media, it sure is. TrevorLoudon.com, TrevorLoudon.com. Thank you, Trevor.
You're most welcome, and thanks to the audience.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Trevor. We'll be right back, guys. Don't go away.